Hey guys, so today isn't exactly a tutorial, but I wanted to share with you guys something that I'm actively working on and will probably in the future turn into a tutorial. So recently in my home automation videos, I've shown you guys how to set up HAP-NodeJS, which is an Apple Homekit accessory server. And I was thinking to myself that it's really annoying sometimes. Well, okay, so there are two main annoying things with HomeKit. Besides, I guess, if you're an Android user, not being able to use it. The first thing that annoys me is that HomeKit has basically scenes. So you can basically set different, like, automatically trigger a ton of events. But when you have a lot of devices in your house, these events, they can add up really quickly, especially, for example, this down Cineglow scene. Each light has 3 or 4 different events associated with it. It has an on event, a brightness, saturation, and hue. And that adds up when you have a lot of lights to control with one action. And one of the limitations of HomeKit as it stands right now is that I think the maximum number of actions per scene is 60. It might be 50, it might be 60, I can't remember. But either way, it's, you can see that this one right here hits 45. And I have others that I would like to be able to do, but that go way above 60. So a way that you can kind of get around this is through the use of triggers. So triggers allow you to trigger events based on time or based on certain characteristics of your various HomeKit devices. So you can see I have like daytime, morning, late night, nighttime, evening. And what these do is they can automatically trigger multiple different scenes. So that's one way to kind of get around it, is by having automatic timers to trigger all of the lights in your house to change or do whatever it is that you want to do. Building on top of that, and this is where today's project comes in, is that I realized that it would be really pretty easy. I can make my own HomeKit devices. In the last video I showed you guys how to build mood lights. Well, you can add other kinds of devices. So, and you can see I have a lot of different HomeKit items here, especially in my lights. So it would be really nice if I could create a couple of scenes, maybe like an upstairs and a downstairs on scene or something like that, that each scene has just a few actions or whatever, up to 60 actions, but I can trigger them all at once. So what I'm working on today is I have just a little ESP module here, and I've put a button on top, and I have a little regulator on the bottom. And my goal here is that I can push this button and have it talk to HomeKit and have a HomeKit trigger based on an event here. So I've actually already started to demo this just on the computer, just sending this will communicate via MQTT, so just sending dummy commands through the computer. And I've created a quote-unquote light switch here, which has basically would be linked to this device here. And when I push this button, it could activate a trigger. And so that trigger could then activate 2 or 3 different scenes in the house. And so this kind of solves 2 problems that I've been facing with HomeKit. One is that HomeKit is this great kind of unifying protocol. It lets you have a bunch of devices all hooked up, but my devices so far have only controlled themselves. So I can have a light activate or something like that through HomeKit, and it will activate one of my lights. But let's say so in my house, I have a lot of Hue lights. I have a lot of the Philips Hue light bulbs. And so far in my work with HomeKit, I've basically kept the Hue bulbs separate because those scenes can get really, really big, and my lights separate. So every time I want to do something like turn all the lights in my house on or off, I tap one of the hue commands here to activate one of the hue scenes through their app. And then I go and activate whatever my HomeKit scene is that corresponds. So I have like an up daytime here scene for hue, and then here I have up daylights here. So I end up having to hit two different things, which that's not ideal. So my goal is that I can push that one button and have it both activate the hue lights as well as my lights in whatever fashion I wanted to do it. This also lets me have now just physical switches in the house that can control the lights that aren't just on my phone. So this lets guests, for example, I could put a flip switch in my guest room and have that correspond to the light in that room, but that light is actually being controlled through the HomeKit system, not through the electrics in the house. So that's what I want to show you guys today. I'm going to finish up wiring this here. All I really have to do is just add a resistor and a capacitor. The resistor is just being a pull up resistor for this button, which I believe I've put on pin 0. And this cap is just going to be a filter cap for the power supply for the little regulator there on the back. So yeah, I'm just going to wire this up, and I'll briefly show you the code for both the device here and the HomeKit code, and we'll see if it works. So I'm just going to clear some of this stuff out of the way and get set up here. So again, yeah, I just have to add this little pull-up. This is a 1K resistor and this little 220 microfarad cap to filter out the power supply a little bit. Alright, there's the cap, and I'm just gonna bend that to kind of be a little bit out of the way there. Alright, there's the cap in place. So one of the things you'll notice I'm doing, I'm not actually soldering this very well. I'm just sort of tacking everything in place and then kind of just trying to clean up the solder joints a little bit after the fact. Yeah, it's not the best way to do it, but, you know, it works when you're just kind of doing a little home prototyping project. Alright, and there's the resistor in place. So, yeah, there we go. Now, in theory, with the right code on here, I should be able to plug this in, and I actually have built myself a little USB power adapter here. I should be able to just plug this in once the code is uploaded and have a little smart switch. So yeah, let's go take a look at the code and see if I can get that working. Alright, well, before getting to the code, sadly, I wrote it and I uploaded it to this board here, and it didn't work. The board didn't actually even work. And took a little bit of troubleshooting there and trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And you live and learn. Apparently last time I went and bought some of these LM1117 regulators, I bought the adjustable kind, not the set output 3.3 volt kind. So rather than doing the voltage divider and all that crap, I'm just gonna swap it out for a little AMS 1117 and maybe tack on a little heat sink on there just for good measure. But hey, you know what? Look at the eBay listing closely before you buy. I think that's the lesson we learned right here. So I'm going to go quickly fix this mistake, and then we'll go take a look at the code. Luckily, these little guys have the same pinout as their bigger cousins, so I'm just going to solder it right on top and then just clip this guy right off. All right, so here we have a quick rundown of the code that I have running on the ESP. So I have some libraries I include here, and notably the ones that you don't have are these My Networks and ESP Helpers CPP. And these are a couple libraries I created to just make working with MQTT and the ESP a little bit easier. It automatically handles the connection, dropping the connection, reconnecting, maintaining subscriptions to the MQTT server, just all that stuff. It's just sort of a little helper library I created, and I'll probably put that out and give a more in-depth explanation of how that works in a later video, but just noting on those. And then I got some variables here. I have my button topic and I have my button pin on 0. So basically, this is going to come in two variants: a stateless switch and a stateful switch. So a stateless switch doesn't really care what happened, it just cares that you did something. So this is like your garage door opener, for example. You push the button and the door just opens or closes. It does whatever the opposite of its previous state was. A stateful switch is like a light switch. You flip it on, the lights are on, and you flip it off, and the lights are off. So this current state variable basically keeps track of whether or not it's in an on position or an off position. And we keep track of whether or not it's stateless actually in the HOMEKit code here, which I'll get into in a moment. But so this keeps track of the current state if that's important, if we're using that. Then I create a myESP object, and in setup I do all of these different little things. I enable a heartbeat, which just makes the little LED on the ESP module blink in sort of a heartbeat fashion to tell me that it hasn't crashed. I have in this library a hopping ability so that you can input multiple networks and it will just latch on to whichever one it can find. And I did that basically so that I could have a module, upload the code to it, and then use it at home or at work interchangeably, and it would automatically just connect to whichever network was available. I had a subscription, and I set my callback to allow it to pick up and automatically change this current state if that's necessary. And then I start it up. And then the last thing I do is I just set the pin to an input. So in my loop here, I have a myESP loop function, which returns true when it's connected to both Wi-Fi and MQTT server, and false otherwise. And so if it's connected, we read the button pin. If the button pin was low, if the button pin is low and the last red state is high, we want to run our main important publishing code. And so on the ESP, it's connected, the button is connected via a pull up resistor. So when we push the button, it goes low. So this is basically saying if it was pushed and the last time we read it, it wasn't pushed, then run this code. And this code basically just flips current state, and current state gets sent either, well, if current state is true, we send a 1, otherwise we send a 0, and we tell it that our last read, so this variable here, is equal to whatever we read here, which will always be low. So we set that to low, and then we wait 500 milliseconds just to basically have some debounce in the system. And that's really the core of the code. This other little else if here just makes sure that if our button pin was red and it was high, then set the last read to high. So kind of just making sure it's set up and ready to run here. And then we just yield. And yield is kind of like delay of 0. I think actually it might perfectly equate to delay of 0. And it just lets the ESP module actually run some of its background code so that it can handle the Wi-Fi stack and everything. And the callback just says, we're only subscribed to the button topic. So if we get a 1 on the button topic, our current state is true. otherwise it's false. So it's a fairly standard, simple little Arduino sketch for button reading. So now let's go over here to the HomeKit code. So yeah, ignore some of the profanity there that tends to happen. So I call it a light switch. I give it a name, a unique ID, username. This is all stuff that is talked about in other videos of mine. The main things to keep track of here is that I have this var stateless. So this is where I can tell it whether or not I want this to be a stateful or stateless switch. So in a stateless switch, again, it's like your garage door opener. You push it, it does whatever the opposite of the last thing it was at. So you push it, it opens the door, you push it again, it closes it. So that's where we set stateless. Our current state here, this is basically the variable that keeps track of whatever is coming in through MQTT. So when we get a new message from the ESP, it activates and it basically sets this variable to a 1 or a 0. So then we do some setup on the accessory side to get it all set up for iOS. And then we basically have a couple little functions here. We have a get state, which just returns the local, so we have a locally current state here, and it will just return the current state here. Set state will take it takes a new state coming in, and if that new state is not equal to the current state, we will, first of all, we'll publish that state to the MQTT topic, and secondly, we'll set the local current state to the new state. And I probably don't need to have a separate current state for the MQTT current state versus the localized current state, but this is just a way for me, the switch action here is just referenced specifically for the accessory itself. So this current state is kind of for the MQTT side, and this one is for the HomeKit accessory side of things. And then I have a function called update here, which all it does is just takes it calls set state, and it takes this global MQTT current state as its argument, and that just runs this code. And again, if they're not equal to each other, it runs this code. If they are, then it ignores it. Then down here at the bottom, I have basically just this is where we run the update code. So every 2 seconds, this will go and fetch the latest current state from the MQTT broker. And then iOS needs to be fed every so often the current state of this switch. So again, within this every 2 seconds, we send the on characteristic, and we tell it to send it whatever get state returns, which is going to be the value of this current state here. And then here's where we use this stateless variable that I have. If this is a stateless switch, then after running this update and the get state for the accessory, if it is stateless and the switch action, and the get state is equal to true, so basically if we're stateless and we just flipped it on, what I want to do is now then set state to false. So this lets me basically push it, have iOS recognize that the switch has been switched on, and then automatically after it picks up on that, it'll switch it back to off. So that next time I can push it, and like your garage door opener, it'll basically let me activate actions whenever whenever the switch is set on, and this just automatically sets it back off once that action has been achieved. So again, yeah, it's not too difficult. I know I'm kind of talking on the fly here, so this is maybe a little bit more long-winded than it needs to be, but it's pretty simple. And let's see now. Hopefully I've done all the code right and the wiring right. Let's go and take a look and see that the whole thing actually works. All right, so here you can see I have on my phone here my light switch, the accessory that I just made. And I have my ESP module, and there you can actually see that little heartbeat there. It just basically tells us that it's running and that it hasn't crashed. And so I've set this up in a stateful way. So when I push the button, the light switch should activate, and I push it again and it should deactivate. So let's see if it works. I'm going to push the button here. Hey, look at that. Switch came on, and now if I push it again, there we go. So this is awesome. I'm really psyched to have this. I will definitely try to make a more in-depth tutorial of exactly how this all works, but just to know and see that it actually is working, this is really cool, because now I can go and I can take this and set up triggers that can automatically happen when I just push the little button here. So I can make like a good night button for under my desk that I just push it and it activates the security system, turns off all the lights, sets the temperature, does all of that. So this is really awesome, really powerful, and I'm really happy to get it running. I will definitely add this to the list of the home automation at home tutorials to give basically a more in-depth how this all works. All right, well, that's all there is for today. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this kind of content, definitely just, go out of the full screen and click subscribe. It means a lot to me to have you guys subscribe. And you guys can, even if you really want to, you can donate to my channel here. So if you go to my channel homepage, you can just, just a couple dollars. That's awesome for me. But no big deal. I'm happy to put these videos out regardless of donations or anything like that. So that's all there is for today, and I'll see you guys later.